Cloud. Hey, cool. We're recording. Super impromptu, so extremely unfiltered. But it's going to the unfiltered channel. So we're going to talk about. So this is primarily aimed at like people on the buyer experience, digital experience team working in the GitLab product codebase, which is not sort of like our normal place that we hang out in. And this is something that I've spent a good amount of my time getting up to speed on. And there's just a lot. It's just a different context. So this might I've got a thing I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna like have Miracle like watch me do it and ask questions as I do it, and I'll sort of like talk out loud as I do it. So we'll go like a little bit slowly here. Before we get started, and like when we get started, I'll talk about what I'm doing. But before I do you have any questions, Miracle?
No.
Cool. And I'd ask the audience, but they can't ask me contemporaneously. So let's share the screen. Cool. All right. Cool. Sweet. So this issue is marked confidential, but it's not actually. That was erroneously done, so don't worry about it if you see that little thing there. So I'm working on. So we have. So in the product, we have places where we have Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics running. We also use Snowplow for analytics in there too. So these are two different. They run in two different contexts, right? And the analytics team wants to be able to join some of the Google Analytics data with the Snowplow analytics data. And in order to join them, they need to share some attribute. And so we think that like a good attribute to do so actually already lives in, we have this in Snowplow standard context. So I'll show it. So it's even here. It kind of hangs out everywhere. You see this number 134655353 is the like.
I don't think you're sharing the correct screen. I see a screen.
Oh, you see what?
I see a really cute screensaver.
Oh my gosh. Well, you can all see my fiance and I in our engagement photos. Desktop 2. Hello. Do you see this, or do you see my screen?
Nope, I see this. Okay, that makes way more sense because when you started, you were talking about confidentiality, and I was like, I guess he means his engagement photo.
Nope. Well, anyways, yeah, that's that. So what I was talking about was this issue here, and again, we're joining data between our Google Analytics and Snowplow, and Snowplow already has this namespace ID, and so we want to grab it. So before I dig into the code, I have been like back and forth on this issue for a week now. And this is important because developing in the GitLab product with the GitLab developer kit is a much slower feedback cycle than we have in like our Next repository, because as it should be, it's a huge code base with thousands of contributors. It just like there's more moving pieces, right? And so your MO when you're working in the product is mostly to shorten your feedback cycles, and the best way to do that is to lay the best plans you possibly can. So I've done a little bit of coding, like exploratory stuff, but mostly I've been talking with people to like hone in on like what do we want to do, because like if you make a plan that is not the right plan, like you're gonna have a bad time. Like it's just it's gonna take a long time to find out that you're executing against the wrong plan, because it's gonna take just a longer cycle. So spend a lot of time planning and talking to people and like really digging in on like what they're asking you to do, especially if you're working with stakeholders in the buyer experience team, because because this isn't really our code base, the art of the possible is not so readily available. People don't really like know what we can and cannot do, right? And so the requests are very high level and sometimes lack the clarity you need to make the right choices. So I spent a lot of time talking about this, both in this call and also before I even sat down to do work. But I now know what I'm doing. I'm like extremely clear on what it is, which is basically, so we have this event that when we where are we? Transactions. Yeah. When people make transactions on the GitLab.com/subscription/ when people buy stuff here, we fire this transaction. And we track it in Google Tag Manager. And now what we want to do is we want to add a key called dimension 36, and we want to give it some namespace ID that matches snowplow here, right? That's it. Once that dimension 36 goes in, and it's not an arbitrary name, it's meaningful in Google Tag Manager, even though it looks somewhat arbitrary. Once this starts getting pushed up to Google Tag Manager, our enhanced e-commerce analytics can join its data against what we have in Snowplow. So the two analytics teams, people working on Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics, and people working in Snowplow can begin to have an entirely shared context where they can say, we're seeing this information across both of our tools, which is going to be super useful, right? So that's basically it. But there's a lot of steps to doing it. So I'll stop there. Does the thing that I'm doing make sense to you?
Yes.
Cool. So here are my tips for what I'm just going to show you what I do when I work on here. I usually grab I love Markdown. It's my favorite thing. So I just have I just call it scratch.md. I just have this in I have it in I have a work notes repository that's outside of the GitLab thing. It's just it's like Notion, it's useful to write something down outside of the code you're writing. If you stop and start, get interrupted, or just need to think things through. So I've already done a lot of that thinking in the issue over here, and I've confirmed stuff with Jay and Dennis, and here we are, we're going to use this value. So then my scratch sheet, I was okay, let's use whatever in this value here. And so the actual first thing I might do is I say okay, find where we set snowplow standard context. And this is actually I would literally write this down for myself, and then in my VS Code workspace, I would Control Shift F for, let's just find it, snowplow standard context, assuming that I'll be able to find it. And hey, there it is. There's a bunch of different files. I've actually already sort of found some of this stuff. So there's already some spec files we use just to write tests and stuff for the front end. So the nice thing is I can sort of see I'm looking for stuff I can copy, right? I can see patterns of okay, here's how they're using Jest to test stuff about the snowplow standard context, because it lives in the front end. It lives in the global window object. So that makes sense. There's getting the standard context spec, something about initializing tracking. And really I'm sort of looking for okay, is there a namespace ID? What is it? Namespace ID? Not in this one. Namespace ID, not in this one. Maybe it's namespace ID, right? I think that actually it lives. Oh, it drills down. There's in this Haml file is where they create the window.gl object, and then they provide the standard context with and this is all Haml, so it's embedded Ruby here, right? Where there's this standard context Ruby thing, namespace ID. Hey, here it is. This is, so basically it takes the to hash function here, the to context function, I think, probably wraps this 2h, and it takes the namespace, finds the ID, and drops it in this namespace ID thing, which is what ends up in here, right? So all that to say, this is just me sort of it's exploratory, right? And that's kind of what I've already done that here, and I'm sort of getting started doing the actual work. So now that I've sort of pulled on a thread, and I've been I have this, again, it's the art of the possible. Think about what's already out there, right? What can I use? What can I copy? What can I emulate? What do I need that doesn't exist? That's always a big one to find. If this didn't exist, which is a lot of my work in the past couple of days has been finding it at all, and before I knew that it existed, I was like, oh, geez, this might take a lot of time because it doesn't. I don't know if we can get this data. And we finally found it. Thank you, Jay and Dennis, for helping me find that. So. Cool. So, write it down, do the thing, and I'll delete that because it's not so useful here. So the first thing I do is let's start with tests, right? Miracle, are you familiar with the idea of red-green refactor?
No.
Oh, okay. So in test-driven development, there's this idea of like red-green refactor, which is basically if you're doing TDD, and you don't have to do it very strictly. I mean, there's a lot of value in like exploratory coding before you start writing tests. I already have this in my head. Like if you're doing a thing that's very well defined and you have a clear plan on, doing test-driven development is a little bit easier to do. It's still like kind of weird, but it's really useful, and it helps you it helps get your merge requests approved because we try and test everything in the GitLab codebase, or practically we test the things that matter, which is most things. And so red-green refactor is the idea of before you do anything, the first thing you do is you write a test that fails, right? Because what you want to do is you want to write a failing test, then you want to write the code that makes the test pass. And then you want to clean up that code and make sure your tests continue to pass. And what that does is it stops you from getting false positives. It's very easy to write a test that accidentally passes sometimes because you're not testing the right thing. And so that's actually what I've done here. So we have this Google Tag Manager index file, which has a bunch of utilities for running Google Tag Manager stuff in the GitLab product on the front end. And it has an associated underscore spec file. And there's a bunch of tests that already exist here. But I'm just going to focus here. So I've made a new description block, which is, for getting the namespace ID from the Snowplow standard context. And there's going to be two contexts, right? There's going to be when one exists and has a value, and when one doesn't, because I'm anticipating that it might not. And so I want to define both of that behavior. So I'm going to start with the happy path, which is just when there is a value in window GL Snowplow standard context data namespace ID, right? And so so jest runs in a node process. Because it runs in a node process, it doesn't actually have access to like a browser. It doesn't have browser APIs like window. So we actually like create a window variable, right? Like it's just a global window variable as like a testing mechanism, because it should basically function as though this JavaScript code was it was like talking to a window object, because it's just an object. So I'm actually going to set this entire, I'm just going to like set this up to be like a fake namespace ID of 123. And then, and you'll notice, I haven't even written this function, and it's even red because it's like, hey, I don't know what this is. This is my red on the red-green refactor, or it's part of it. Then I'm going to run a jest spec down the terminal here. Make this a little taller, and you can target specific spec files. If you run yarn jest, you'll run them all, and it's a lot, and you don't want to do that. And again, back to one of the first things I said is like you want to tighten up your feedback loops, right? So I don't even have GTK running. The nice thing here is you can just run jest, and they're isolated. They're unit tests. So here I can run this test, and you'll see it. I already ran it before, so it fails, and it runs. It takes a minute. Just gotta do is saying, hey, there's my failure. It'll sort of tell us something about like get namespace ID is not defined, right? So let's define it. Export const get namespace ID. And again, red, green, refactor. So like, let's keep it red. Let's not make it work yet. Let's just return null, right? And then, I have to actually import this here. I'll stop here. Is that making sense? Like what I've just done is like, cool. Test fails, write stuff to make it pass, or write stuff to get past the first failure. And then we should be failing based on, not just on like the mechanics of like, does this function exist? But now it should be, we're failing on the wrong value. Right, we expected 1, 2, 3, and we received null. Cool. So let's make a pass. You know, we can do something super simple, right? We can even literally just return 1, 2, 3. Just to get it green, to demonstrate, and again, this like demonstrates that like, hey, I can pass it. Obviously, this is now we will get into the refactor part. So like, hey, it's not working. Perfect. Okay, this is actually great. So this is why I do red green refactor, because like I'm testing my assumptions. And this was kind of silly. I thought that this existed and it doesn't, so it's like failing on trying to add stuff to it. So do I have window.gl? I do not. Window. Is this before each block that does stuff? See if I can get this to pass. Okay, cool. So that passed. So the snowplow standard context works. So then let's make a dot data. And what did I want us to do? And let's set it equal to an object, and let's give it namespace ID 1, 2, 3. Cool. Can we pass now? Oh, you're not happy with me. What's up? Cannot set properties of undefined setting data. Oh, interesting. Okay. Window .gl equals snowplow standard context data namespace ID. Cool. Are you happy with me now? Again, this is stopping me. It's also stopping me from getting like false negatives where like I'm gonna like really, hey, there we go. Okay, cool. I just needed to like mock this out a little bit better. So yeah, now we've set up this thing. The snowplow standard context didn't exist before. Now it does. It has a sub object of data with a key value of namespace ID 1, 2, 3. But you'll notice it's, you know, now it's a false positive. We're hard coding to return 1, 2, 3. You know, if I set this to 3, 2, 1, we would get a failure. And again, this is just part of that red green refactor cycle of like, let's make sure we're testing the right things and we're not just like asserting true. Like sometimes you can just be like, assert that true equals true. And hey, that's interesting. Oh, yeah, because I didn't change my assumptions. Sorry, I'm coding and talking and I'm like thoroughly unprepared for this. So you know, mistakes are bound to happen. Hey, there it is. Okay, so that failed. So now, and you can actually, yeah, that's fine. We'll just keep this hard coded. Let's see, return. Interesting, window.gl.snowplow standard context.data.namespace ID. This is not how it's going to look at the end. But I want to see, and again, this is why we write tests, because it's gonna be super fast. Like you'll notice again, I'm not doing this in the browser. I'm not like constantly refreshing. I'm not like having the Rails app reload. I'm like really testing like one thing, and that keeps those feedback cycles super tight. So if I do this, does that work? Let's find out. Yeah, I think it should work. It doesn't. Why not? At least one assertion to be called, but was not found none. Cannot read. Cool. Okay. And that's because this thing doesn't exist. I think my like autofill gave me something incorrect there. I think that was just a typo, and I think this should pass. Hey, it passes. Right? Cool. So now let's do the next thing. Let's see what happens if if that value doesn't exist, which I think is like a thing that can happen. So we'll describe when it's undefined. Cool. And beep, what do we want to do? So let's see what happens if it returns placeholder value. So let's expect get namespace ID to equal not available. Just have a really explicit like null value here. So we're going to run the test again. I think I can, I wonder, I might be able to, hey, look at that. So this tells me a couple things. One, this before each block is getting set and staying set because it's a global variable. So I think that like there's a side effect here and that's fine. We can do, let's unset it. Let's just make this an empty object. Because the way it failed was it failed by giving me a 321 instead of not available. This is again really important in the red green refactor. I'm seeing like what's failing and why. And now here we go. I'm actually, yeah. So now we're actually bailing out on the actual execution path, right? So the error here is actually on line 281 in the source file of index.js, where because this no longer exists, or the data no longer exists because window.gl is actually an empty object, right? And like if you access this, this ends up on, so it's like window.gl exists is an empty object. Snowplow standard context will come back as undefined. So it's not an error yet. It is like a valid thing to have an undefined attribute in an object. And then when you try and access .data on undefined is like, whoa, I don't know what .data means. And that's what the error is there. So this is great. This tells me that this is my red and now it's time for my green, and then I can sort of refactor. So I think the thing to do here is just do a little OR operator and say not available, right? And we might even do, let's make a little constant up here. Well, no, I'll save that for refactor. Yeah, we'll save that for refactor. That's an internationalization thing. And then see if we're green. We're not yet. What broke? Okay, so this is actually tossing. So let's do, okay. Do a couple things. Let's do const gl equals window or an empty object, const snowplow standard context equals gl or an empty object, const data equals snowplow standard context or an empty object, const namespace ID equals data or an empty object. Yeah. And then we'll return the namespace ID. Why are you mad at me? Oh, camel ID. That's fine. That's just what it needs to be. Cool. I think that'll do it. So now we're like decomposing the object many times, and that should stop me from running into that problem. Hey, it passed, right? So we were red, now we're green, now we can refactor. So I'll do a couple things to refactor. First is I'm going to make this string a constant at the top here, just to communicate like const, we're saying empty namespace ID value is equal to not available. And so this just communicates to people in the future that like this isn't really this is not really like a magic string or anything. It just like whatever value we want it to be should be that. It should be relatively constant. We can change it. We shouldn't because we want to keep the data pretty like happy. And then I've got this little linter error, which is the camel case thing. And we're gonna disable it for this line because this actually, I wonder if, what's the thing when you rename a destructured thing, which comes first? Is it, oh, it doesn't matter. I think it's namespace ID, right? Are we happy now? Hey, we're happy now. Okay, cool. So I don't even need to do that. So again, this is the refactor. So what I did there is I took the, if you're destructuring an object, but you want to rename the key that you're destructuring from, you can use it as like a key value pair, and you put the original key first as the key, and then the value is your new name for that key. And I always forget which order it comes in, but there's only 2 options. So it's pretty, so, it's quick to, why remember it when it's so quick to do. So now we did red, green, refactor. We refactored. We should still be green. Oh, and I wonder if I can, I was half formed thought 15 minutes ago was if we have it set up to watch. Yeah, we sure do. Awesome. So 2 things here. 1, we're still green, even with the refactor. 2, there is the -- watch command, which will watch files for changes and run the stuff. And so let's make a change to an empty string. And hey, look, it runs automatically. You don't have to, you can save yourself some keystrokes there. And look, we're red again. Cool. So that's testing my get namespace ID, which is only part of the puzzle. The next part of the puzzle is I need to hop into, so I'll stop there because that's a really good stopping point. Questions?
No, I was following you.
Oh, cool. Questions that you had in your mind that you answered yourself, or that I answered by continuing to move on. We should, in case there's other people watching this, were there moments where you were like, oh, like why or what?
Yeah, it was when you had the typo. I was wondering why you had changed the name to global on the right side, and then I realized it was a typo.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Well, sweet. We can just keep on keeping on. So then up next is, so this is just a function to like get the namespace ID. That's all. And this will be useful because we'll actually want to use it. Like there's a bigger picture here about what we're doing with the namespace ID that's outside of the context of this issue I'm working on. So I'm going to leave it as an exported function because I'm going to use it elsewhere for other stuff. So this is sort of like, but it's important. Like this is the iterative thing. Like as much as you can, you want to do very small merge requests in the product code base and anywhere, because it's easier for reviewers to reason about. People will not share context. You will never get a reviewer from our team for merge requests into the product code base, which means that no one knows what we're doing. Like you're only going to get people who have no idea what our project looks like. So you want to make like really small merge requests so that people can like reason about it as effectively as possible, right? That's kind of the goal here. So to that end, if you've got like a big, like I have sort of like a weeks-long series of things we're doing to join this data together, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to make like one more change in my track purchase thing. So there will be basically 2 blocks of changes in this merge requests. However, I know that get namespace ID is going to be super useful for like 2, 3, 4 merge requests down the line for me. But I don't have to like bundle that together with that because it will already exist. So as much as you can, and there's advice in the development documentation about like sort of like unbundling changes and being like, hey, if you're working on something, like, can you split it up to like backend changes, front end changes? Like, what can you do to make it smaller, but still like, code that can be tested and deployed and like sort of like build iteratively. So that's one of the advantages to what I'm doing here is like, this is like a small function and I'll use it later. So cool. Up next is, so we're going to end up using this in here. Let's make our test. Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, let's make our test fail again. So I need to get that namespace ID into my track transaction block. And so I will because I don't think exported constants get hoisted like that if they're arrow functions. I'm actually going to define it up here. This is a refactor, and so it's green, so that's good. And then let's do in the track transaction. This should break my tests, I think. So const namespace ID equals get namespace ID. Then this is silly, but I'll refactor it out later. I think this actually needs to go into the product block. It sure does. So let's expand this and give it, this is dimension 36 is the key, namespace ID is the value. Why are we red? Oh, because I don't have closing curly brace. Cool. This should fail. Boom, look at that. It failed. It's exactly what I wanted it to do. But I'm testing my assumptions. I assumed it would fail because I wrote these tests, months ago. So like I know what the tests do. This test is testing a hard-coded whatchamacallit, hard-coded object that's sort of like a golden object of like what it expects the response to look like. And I just modified that object by pushing this dimension 36 key into it, regardless of whether or not, this is not available. Even if this was pulling a number as a number as a string as I expect it to, I would expect this test to fail, because it's new. It's not part of the golden object that I had it testing against before. If this test had passed, I'd be like, that's weird. So it's really good that this test failed. And again, we're back to the red-green refactor cycle. So we're red, and now I'll make it green. In this case, the way to make it green is I just have to go and update the assertions that I have in my tests. And so this is failing on when track transactions is invoked. And then I think we expect these things to look like this. Hello. Products, boom. Category. So this is not where it's going to end up. Dimension 36. Not available. Why are you mad at me? Okay. And then another one when it's invoked that references the select plan. When track transactions is invoked, it's an invalid plan object. What else do we have? Is that it? There's two things. Invokes a push event. Let's save it and see if it passes. Hey, it passes. Okay, cool. So what I actually need to do next, but I'm going to sort of cut it short here because we've been going for a little while, and I got to like take a break, walk the dog, and I think this is sort of like the rest of this is just more work for me to do, right? And it gets a little repetitive from there, but then we get into the refactor stuff. So instead of just like I need to like set up tests that will test different contexts when there are and are not namespace IDs available to sort of like thoroughly test all the execution paths on this. And then I'm going to refactor it a little bit because like I've sort of made a mess of this because I've just been live coding on Zoom rather than like sitting and thinking quietly about like the thing like about style guides. So like what I'll end up doing is I'll go to like GitLab JavaScript style guide, right? I'll go here and I'll sort of like, I'll check this against myself. And they say when you make a merge request, the best thing you can do is actually review it, be your own first reviewer. So once I have the functionality working, the tests are passing, I've refactored it. I'm actually gonna start up the GDK and do a local server, and I'm gonna like test it manually too, just to like make sure that like this stuff translates to reality. Sometimes it doesn't. I'm gonna make sure it translates to reality. And then I'm gonna go through, I'll probably make a merge request so I can see all my changes, run CI, make sure I haven't broken any CI stuff. If that's all passing, before I assign it to a reviewer, I'm gonna do my own review for myself. I'm gonna like go through the JavaScript style guide, like make sure I haven't like made any like clumsy errors that are people are gonna like burn cycles telling me like, hey, don't destructure like this, right? I expect them to want me to destructure differently. And like it's not worth, like someone's already written it down. It's like not worth our time to discuss it if there's like a preferred method to do it. So I'm going to go look through the style guide, find it, and do that. So cool. Do you have any questions as we wrap up here?
No, but thank you for showing me the style guide. That'll help a lot.
Yeah, there's a Ruby style guide as well. There's a SCSS style. There's a bunch of different style guides in the same set of documentation. So yeah, I think that's about it. So keep your feedback cycles short as much as you can. Plan as much as you can. Write tests as much as you can. But like also keep in mind that like I am showing you this after having like sat and thought and talked for like 2 or 3 days. So like it's not all going to come off the top of your head like that. And I'm also working from a bunch of existing files where if you're doing like net new stuff, you're going to have to sort of like navigate through like, where is the right place to put this? And like, what do I need to like bootstrap the file so that it actually knows what's going on?
Okay. So it'll come with time.
It will come with time, and you're gonna get knocked down, and you just pick yourself up again. People are super nice too. They'll be really gentle. The nice thing is the worst thing you can do is get feedback. You'll write some code, you'll try some stuff, you'll push it up, and it'll work or it won't work. It'll be like up to standards or not up to standards. In your very worst case scenario, someone's gonna be like, hey, you need to make XYZ changes, and then you will know the things that you need to change about it, and then the next time you do it will be easier. So it's like very low stakes for not knowing what you're doing here.
Okay, well, that makes me feel better.
Yeah, sweet. Well, I'm gonna end the recording and then we can sort of log off.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, see ya.
Bye.